Hey, Pretty Girl Club, welcome to the Featurism series. I have not ever done an in-depth video about this, so I wanted to do a nice long video where we start coming together and comparing notes on all of our experiences with Featurism. So I'm really glad I'm doing this. Most of our dark-skinned exoticals here are women who are benefiting from Featurism. So I'm going to tell you guys about some of my experiences or some of the things that I've seen. And if you can relate to any of this stuff in the comment section, then you can go ahead and comment down below. Because nothing I say on here is a hard and fast rule. Everything that we discuss on this channel, we're going to end up actually voting on it in the end. But one thing that I've noticed that is definitely something that a lot of people will talk about is if you have what I call keen features or basically small features of any kind. So especially having a narrow nose. So when I talk about a narrow nose, I'm talking about a nose that is not considered wide. So for example, if you turn to the side and your nose is pointy, or if your nose slightly points upward, or if you have a projecting nose as opposed to like a wide flat nose, I've noticed that that is something that a lot of people consider to be kind of a keener feature. A lot of people associate that with benefiting from Featurism. And a good example of this is, remember the show Basketball Wives? Remember OG? And she actually called out a darker skinned exotical on the show because OG was trying to accuse everybody of being colorist. And then one of the girls was like, hey, I'm also dark skinned. And then OG was like, you have westernized features. And everybody was like, what the hell is a Western feature? What she was trying to say was that that woman, I can't remember her name, but I'll put her face and her features up on the screen. What she was saying is that that woman benefits from Featurism. So because she didn't have the wide, flat nose and the very broad, kind of circular, very pouty lips and kind of the wider cheekbones, maybe more of a square jaw, because she didn't have all of the same features as OG, OG was trying to say that their experiences as dark-skinned women would be different, which I actually agree with. I do agree that if you're an unambiguous dark-skinned woman, that's different than being an ambiguous dark-skinned woman. So you guys know my views on this. You can be dark-skinned and also be viewed as ambiguous. We've seen this with black women. We've seen this with Indian women. So when OG made that comment about that darker-skinned girl, she was talking about her benefiting from Featurism. But number one on the list, though, is definitely having kind of a more narrow nose. So when your nose is more narrow than the width of your lips, or if your nose is so narrow to the point where like your nose only takes up the space in between your eyes, it doesn't even go any further than that, that's definitely a sign that you have a more narrow nose. And then especially if you turn to the side and your nose is projecting out from your face, it's kind of pointing outwards, that's a sign that you have a narrow nose. It also could be a sign that you're benefiting from Featurism, because another thing that I'm going to be taking into consideration is if people are getting a plastic surgery to look more ambiguous and they are emulating your nose, that is a very strong sign that you're probably benefiting from some form of Featurism and you don't realize it. Something else I've noticed is that generally speaking in the black community, a lot of unambiguous people will call it out. They'll be like, oh, you have a small nose for a black girl. So they will actually say stuff like that. Like Amara La Negra, a lot of people were saying, well, you look white. Your facial features look like a white woman. You just look like a white woman dipped in chocolate. So if your facial features are causing people to invalidate your blackness, they're saying that because they feel like you're benefiting from Featurism. So you don't have the same traumas that a lot of unambiguous black people have. You're not experiencing discrimination based on your skin tone, your hair texture, and your facial features. So that's why a lot of people in the black community will differentiate. And I will put up photos of examples of broad features versus keen features when it comes to like your nose, lips, and your jawline. I have talked about this in other videos, so be sure to check those videos out. But if people are saying things like you have a small nose for a black girl, or if people of other races, because this is something else, I know this is something I've been told. I've actually had a white woman at work, looking back, this was probably illegal, I don't know, but it's like I've had white people say, oh, no wonder you have such pretty features, when I tell them about my racial background or whatever. Or they'll say, oh, you have pretty features compared to some other people I've seen. I've literally heard people say before that they've seen black people who look like animals. And obviously, I don't support that talking point. But I've heard people say stuff like, oh, well, so and so person looks like a gorilla, or this person looks like an ape. And then they will make a differentiation. They'll be like, oh, she looks like a monkey, but you look like something different because you have different features. Okay, so that's an example of featurism because they're trying to discriminate against somebody who has, I guess you could say, more unambiguously African features, especially if they couple it with dark skin. I've noticed people don't keep the same energy with light skinned women because, a lot of people are internalized colorists. But especially if a woman is dark skinned, they will definitely differentiate your facial features from an unambiguous black woman and her facial features. And I'll put up a picture to prove what I'm talking about. If you don't believe me, you can go to YouTuber Chrissy's channel. Even she has admitted that my talking points in this area are correct. And I'm using the same image that they have used over in unambiguous spaces when they talk about featurism. So if you're a dark-skinned woman, for example, and your facial features are more adjacent to someone like Sinead Gidai, I don't know if I'm saying her name right, but if your facial features are more adjacent to somebody from the Horn African community, I would say that a lot of African Americans view Horn Africans as kind of the poster child for benefiting from featurism. And they'll never admit it, but we tell the truth over here. So if you look like a lot of people who are Somali, Ethiopian, I'm trying to think of the other countries, but if you look like you have kind of this narrow nose, kind of these thin lips, and we'll get into the other features, but if you're being compared to Horn Africans or you're being like mistaken as somebody that is from one of those countries, or if you actually are from one of those countries, you're benefiting from featurism. And so that's why you hear people differentiating between like Horn Africans versus all the other types of Africans. And I know this because I've lived in cities with a high population of like Ethiopians and stuff. And I remember one time I was at work and this lady, she was an unambiguous dark-skinned black woman. She worked at my job with me and she was talking about how her boyfriend left her for a woman that was not really black. And then I was like, oh, okay, like was she white or something? And then she was like, no, she was not really black. She was like Ethio. So that's actually a nickname that I've heard people call Horn Africans or women with that phenotype. I've heard them call Horn Africans Ethio, like as a nickname, or they will describe their features as Ethio. And I think that could have just been in the city that I was living in. But a lot of unambiguous dark-skinned black women are very well aware of featurism. And you guys know my talking point on this. I actually believe that featurism and texturism are more prevalent than colorism because if you're walking down the street, the average person is not going to call out your skin complexion for being dark. But the average person might call out your afro or they might say something about your facial features. And that's because people have not started talking about it enough online, but we're going to be talking about it today. So that's number one, is having a narrow nose. Number two is just having small features in general. If you've got very, very small eyes, especially if your eyes are dramatically slanted, a lot of people associate that with the Asian community because they're basically stereotyping. They're stereotyping your eye shape as being associated with a lot of Asian people. So if you have like smaller eyes, especially if your eyes have a natural cat eye look, and then especially if you have a monolid as well, a lot of people are not going to view you the same as an unambiguous dark-skinned black woman of West African descent. They're not going to view you the same. And I will post photos of women who have these types of eyes so that you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. So some women I'm thinking of off the top of my head are women like Ryan Destiny. Her eyes stand out. Aoki Lee Simmons, she has that same type of eye where it's like slightly slanted and turning upwards, and then she has like a partial monolid. Naomi Osaka is another example. So their actual facial features are being associated with the Asian community. It's not just their skin complexions. And then another one is Ming Lee. Actually, there are two Ming Lees. There's Ming Lee, Nicki Minaj's sister, who also has similar eyes to that. And then there's Ming Lee, Kimora Simmons' daughter, who has that type of eye shape. So if people are commenting on your eyes or people are constantly asking you, are you Blasian? Or if they're assuming that you are Filipino, they're assuming that you're Blasian. Or if people are telling you that, you have chinky eyes, If they're making comments like you're chinky or you look chinky, I know I've actually been called chinky before. So if they're calling you things like chinky, they're actually admitting that you look different than the average unambiguous dark-skinned black woman. And so they're calling out the direct features. Another example of a small feature that people will call out is actually your lips. And I know that it's in style now to have like large lips, but I've actually been around people that will say you have small lips for a black girl. I know I've been told that. Somebody commented that on my Instagram one time. They were like, why do your lips look so small? You have small lips for a black girl. A lot of women who are maybe like biracial or triracial, a lot of us have that combination of kind of this more bulbous, more projecting nose with kind of these slightly thinner lips as opposed to the super full, round, and pouty lips. But guess what? That is technically a keen feature. So examples of women who have keener lips would be women like Alicia Keys. She's a good example. Beyonce, when she was younger, she had slightly smaller lips. So if your lip gets thin when you smile, or, if you feel like you have to constantly wear lipstick, otherwise your lips are going to be invisible, if that's how you feel about your lips, or if that's what people have called out about you, that's actually a keen feature. That means that you have kind of this more pointy look about you. Maybe you have like a pointy nose. Maybe your lips are like thinner. You don't have large lips. A lot of people associate large lips with blackness, obviously. They associate that with being of African descent. If you have smaller, keener, thinner lips, obviously people associate that with other people groups, such as the white community, for example. That's the number one group I can think of where, as a collective, people stereotype them as having slightly thinner lips. So if you have thinner lips, if you've been told things like you have small lips for a black girl, okay, that person is admitting that your features are not like the quote unquote average black girl. Another sign that you have keen lips or small lips is that when you turn to the side, your lips are not pouting outwards. You don't have lips that are coming out from your face. Your lips are very flat to your face. That's a sign that your lips are technically smaller than average, if you were to compare to the average West African person. Another sign of having smaller lips is if you have a longer philtrum. So the philtrum is the distance between your nose and lips. So if you have kind of a longer philtrum, I will post pictures because a lot of people actually associate having a more bulbous nose with slightly thinner lips. A lot of people associate that with being multiracial because a lot of multiracial women naturally do have that look. So some women who are coming to mind off the top of my head are women like Drea Michelle. Her nose kind of, actually, I don't know is Drea Michelle biracial, multiracial? I don't remember. I don't know if she's monoracial or what. But she's a good example of this, where you have kind of a nose that comes up off of your face. So when you turn to the side, you can kind of see the nose pointing out. Another example is like Ruby Rose. So you have where you can see your nose kind of pointing out from the side. But then sometimes, especially if you're not wearing any lip color, it's almost like your lips kind of disappear. And then, it draws more attention to your eyes. So that's actually a form of ambiguity because you're going to look like a totally different person when you put on lipstick versus having no lipstick. Because if you put on the lipstick, or if you put on lipstick and lip liner to kind of make your lips look very full, you're going to look more African adjacent. Whereas if you just take off that makeup, then you're going to have almost like this slightly more ambiguous look about you. So that's something else that I've never heard any black content creators talk about, is how the size of your lips affects the way that you're perceived. So if you've ever been told you have small lips for a black girl, okay, that means that person is basically saying you do not have black girl lips. They're saying that part of your face is not a quote unquote black woman's look. Another example of women who have slightly keener lips would be like Christina Milian is coming to mind. Alicia Keys is coming to mind. So when you turn to the side angle or when you turn to a 3/4 profile, your nose pops out of your face, but your lips are not popping out of your face. You don't have a Bratz doll. You don't have kind of that typical Bratz doll aesthetic. And by the way, one's not better than the other. Obviously both are beautiful, but it's like you don't have the Bratz doll aesthetic. You don't quite have that. Actually, it's going to be damn near impossible for you to have the Bratz doll aesthetic. You may have more of a Barbie aesthetic, if that makes sense. Like if you look at the facial features of a Barbie doll versus a Bratz doll, Bratz dolls, their lips are very full. their cheekbones and stuff are very full, almost like these apple cheeks. And then if you look at a Barbie doll, it's kind of more pointy and kind of keen, so the lips are less visible. Okay, so that's another example of a keen feature. So small eyes, small nose, small lips. And then I talked about smaller jaw lines in the other video that I made on this. So if you have, I don't want to call it an egg-shaped head. I just don't know what else to call it. But it's like if your chin is kind of more pointed, if your chin is more narrow, if you have kind of a narrow forehead, kind of a narrow chin. So I'm thinking of Alicia Keys. I'm thinking of Justine Skye off the top of my head. So just kind of this narrow aesthetic. I'm thinking of Ethiopian women, Somali women, Eritrean women. So if there's a narrowness about your face and about your actual head shape and jawline structure, Sade is another example of this. Having kind of a slightly more narrow, pointed chin, kind of a pointier jawline, sharper features, as opposed to the rounded out, kind of softer features that a lot of West African women have, or unambiguous women. Jasmine Tooks is also coming to mind when I think of this type of jawline. Jordan Dunn is also popping up in my head, kind of keener facial features with kind of this more narrow jawline. And I will post comparison pics so that you guys understand what I'm talking about. So now that we've talked about kind of the basics of what is considered kind of benefiting from featurism or not being associated with unambiguous blackness. So not only is it having small features, but another thing too is your eye color. So if you have light eyes, if you have blue eyes, green eyes, hazel eyes, some form of light brown eyes, some amber colored eyes, kind of this light golden brown, a lot of people are going to call that out because we know that in the unambiguous black community, the majority of unambiguous people have very dark eyes. So if you've got some lightness to your eyes, if your eye color is very similar to people of other racial backgrounds, well, people are going to accuse you of benefiting from featurism. That is going to make you stand out. And I know that a lot of people think that, oh, there's no way that something as simple as your nose and lips and your jawline or your eyes can make you stand out. Actually, yes, there is a such thing as it making you stand out. You will have a different experience. Your entire life will be different when it comes to featurism. Your experiences with featurism are going to be the exact opposite of the average woman who suffers from featurism because people are going to constantly call you out based on something like your eye color. So instead of them describing you as, oh, the dark-skinned black girl over there, they're going to say, oh, she's the dark-skinned girl with the green eyes. Oh, yeah, the dark-skinned guy who has the light eyes. So if people are calling out your eye color as an identifier, that's a sign that you are technically benefiting from featurism because they're admitting that your eye color makes you unique in comparison to the rest of the unambiguous community. So that's why a lot of times, even if you see dark-skinned women who have light eyes and stuff like that, they won't be able to relate to the featurism experiences of other dark-skinned unambiguous black women because they literally don't have the same features. So instead of people kind of denigrating their features or saying things like, oh, your nose is too big, or making fun of their lips or whatever, calling them duck lips, and then 10 years later, now people are getting fillers to look like your lips. A lot of women with keener facial features or with light eyes, they don't have that experience. So a sign that you're being kind of pedestalized for that feature is if people are nicknaming you green eyes or blue eyes, or, oh yeah, the girl with the pretty eyes, or, like people will definitely make it a thing, especially in the dating market as well. They actually have done studies about eye color on dating apps, and they talk about the different experiences of women of all races who have different eye colors. So if people are emphasizing your eyes, or if they're like talking about your eyes, if they're identifying you based on you having lighter eyes, okay, that's a sign that you're benefiting from featurism. Okay, so anything other than dark brown eyes, you're pretty much going to get called out for it. You're pretty much going to have people differentiating you from others because of your eye color. Also, a lot of people think that featurism is based on having Eurocentric features. In the black community, that's actually false. I don't believe that featurism in the black community is only based on Eurocentric features. I think featurism in the black community is based on any feature that is considered non-black. any feature that's considered non-black is going to be exotified in the black community. So if you have an Asian, kind of a phenotypically Asian face, that's going to be exotified. So it doesn't have to be your features look Eurocentric. It could be that a person's features look like a Native American person or like some sort of Indian person or some sort of, Asian adjacent person. And people will definitely call it out. Another thing is freckles. If you are, let's say you have a lighter skin tone or kind of a brown skin tone and you have freckles on your face, that is definitely something that people are going to notice. They're going to definitely call that out. Some people might even identify you based on your freckles. Or they may ask questions like, oh, are you mixed? Or like, you look mixed. Let's say you're monoracial. You could be 85% African, 90% African, and you happen to come out with like a lot of freckles and stuff on your face. People are definitely going to view you differently because they associate freckles with multiracial people. People associate freckles with multiracial people. People associate freckles with white people. So that's why I believe that if somebody has freckles on their face, let's say they have broad features and they have freckles, okay, they're going to be exotified because of the actual freckles. Because you can't deny that freckles are associated with non-black people and with, multi-generationally mixed people. Also, have you ever noticed that when it comes to the featurism conversation, whenever somebody wants to talk about facial symmetry, they'll try to call you ugly. And it's like, okay, can you give me an example of a quote unquote ugly, unambiguous black woman? Why is it that in black YouTube spaces, whenever they want to talk about someone that's quote unquote ugly, they pull up a picture of someone with a lighter skin tone or someone mixed race? And they try to act like unattractive, dark-skinned black women don't exist. Has anyone else noticed that? And then they'll say that if you're not attracted to an unambiguous woman, then you're a featurist. I just wanted to throw that in there. But another thing I want to talk about too when it comes to featurism is how when you're associated with non-blackness, people accuse you of benefiting from featurism. So let's point out what makes someone's facial features look unambiguous. So it's having that wider flat nose. We talked about that. Also, I want to talk about the Cupid's bow. Having that more defined Cupid's bow, like it's very deep, kind of like Rihanna. She has a very defined Cupid's bow. That's something that people associate with blackness. Because, generally speaking, a lot of unambiguous dark-skinned black people have that very defined Cupid's bow. It's kind of like that divot in between your nose and lips. So I decided to ask ChatGPT what the most common West African features are. And ChatGPT said that well-defined Cupid's bow. So having the combination of the full lips with the defined Cupid's bow, that's going to be a more unambiguous looking facial feature. And then having those high prominent cheekbones. So think of, the lady from Wicked. She's like the first person that comes to mind. Viola Davis is coming to mind. So kind of these prominent cheekbones with almost like these apple cheeks. So that's when your cheekbones are projecting strongly from your face, like they're really projecting outwards. ChatGPT also said having almond eyes or having round-shaped eyes with heavy lids, so kind of the larger eyelids or bedroom eyes, that's more of a common West African feature. And then having a round face, a rounded jawline or square jawline is a more common West African feature. So you guys know kind of what a more square jawline would look like. LMI is coming to mind. And then it also said short to medium facial length. So, and then actually ChatGPT even compared it to the elongated faces of like East African features. So I tend to use the term Horn African because I understand that East Africans could be like other countries other than like Ethiopia or like the Somali people and the Eritreans. So I tend to use the term Horn African. So if you don't have a rounded jawline, if you don't have a square jawline, if you have kind of, I don't know, maybe an oval or a super long face, kind of like Aaliyah, she had kind of a slightly longer face, you're going to be exotified. Your actual bone structure is going to be exotified. Another interesting thing that I noticed was on ChatGPT, it even talked about body types when I typed in featurism. And it said the most common West African body types are mesomorphic or endomorphic body types. So muscular, athletic build, or curvy. That's literally what it says on ChatGPT. So you can't say that I'm stereotyping unambiguous black women's body types. It said prominent hips and thighs and having strong glutes and legs. So if you are naturally very thin, if you're naturally not muscular, you may find that you're being stereotyped, especially if you're benefiting from featurism as well, and then maybe you have a different body type where it's skinnier, then you might end up getting stereotyped as something else. Because I told you guys, like in my case, whenever I'm very skinny, if I wear my hair straight, I actually don't really wear my hair in a silky straight style anymore because a lot of people, they start stereotyping me as being Asian adjacent or being Blasian or something like that because I have the skinny body type. And then if you couple that with the skin tone and then you couple it with having a sleeker hair texture. So a lot of people, in my case, they've associated my body type when it's very thin more so with the Asian community because I'm not thick. I don't naturally have kind of those strong legs, kind of like Serena Williams or something. I don't naturally have these super strong glutes and super toned and defined muscles. Something else I forgot to mention about noses too. Generally speaking, a lot of unambiguous people are stereotyped as having more large nostrils, kind of like a nostril flare, like naturally more flared nostrils, if that makes sense. So if you got small nostrils or like you can't really see your nostrils from a forward facing angle, or if your nostrils are just super tiny and it just looks like two little holes, then you're probably not going to be associated with the same stereotypes as people who have larger nostrils or naturally flared nostrils. So out of curiosity, I typed in what the common facial features are in the Indian community. I typed it into ChatGPT just to see. And ChatGPT was talking about how having kind of a prominent nose, so having a prominent nose or a straight nose, sometimes if you have a slight hump, kind of like a slightly hooked nose, but it's still generally straight, and then having that rounded out nasal tip, a lot of people associate that actually with the Indian community. The first person that came to mind when I was thinking about this was Bernice Burgos. Her nose really stands out to me. Some other features that are commonly associated with the Indian community is having those thicker eyelashes, like these very thick eyelashes, having these very thick, naturally arched eyebrows. A lot of people associate that with the Indian community. So if people are telling you, you look Indian, you look Asian, you look like something else, especially if people from the Indian community are saying that, if people from other communities are mistaking you as one of them because of how your face looks, that's a sign that you're benefiting from featurism because your actual facial features have ambiguity in them. So that's why other people are mistaking you as being a part of their group. And this also can be pretty annoying though too, because I would say one of the downsides of that is sometimes people from these other groups think they can try you because they think you're one of them. Like I know I've had problems before with some Indian women because kind of depending on my makeup or kind of depending on how they perceive me, some of them perceive me as being a part of them or they perceive me as having that as a part of my background. So then they think they can talk crazy to me and they think I won't call them racist because, you know, they're looking at me like, oh, she's multiracial, she's part Indian. So if you have issues like that where maybe a lot of women from the Latina community like to play games with you, well, one of the questions I would ask is, do you actually look like you're Afro-Latina? Because that could be a part of it. They're viewing you as competition because you have similar features to them. So if you're experiencing this dynamic that we talk about in this community, which is like women of other races, they view you as competition because your features are kind of similar, but you also have the blackness in there as well, which makes you exotic in their eyes. That's a sign that you're benefiting from featurism because you're adjacent to unambiguous blackness and you're also adjacent to non-blackness. Let's talk about Filipino facial features and what stereotypes people have on those features. So, by the way, everything that I'm saying in this video, it's according to ChatGPT. So it's not me just making it up. So some of the most common Filipino facial features are having that low nasal bridge. So I'm thinking of Cassie when she first came out. So the nose tip can tend to be a little bit more rounded or bulbous and kind of having a slightly shorter nose as opposed to, for example, an unambiguous black person that would have the more wide, flat nose. A lot of people from the Filipino community have this slightly shorter nose. It's slightly rounded out. So if you also have the rounded out eyes, kind of this round eye shape, like this doe eye look, a lot of people associate that with Filipino people, that eye shape. And then it says on ChatGPT, the most common face shapes in the Filipino community are rounded faces or heart-shaped faces with a softer jawline and kind of fuller cheeks. So almost like this youthful appearance, almost like a baby face type of appearance with less of a noticeable Cupid's bow. So her, the singer, she's actually coming to mind. Miss Darcy, the YouTuber, I think she might be part Filipino, but I could be wrong though. Because I have noticed sometimes Filipino features and African American features can overlap a little bit. But having kind of these doe eyes, especially if you have kind of these hooded eyelids or, like I said, the monolids, but a bigger version of it, a lot of people stereotype that as being associated with the Filipino community. Now let's talk about actual common features in European descent people. So when I typed it into ChatGPT, it said skin tone, typically fair to a light beige. So anytime I hear someone trying to uphold the paper bag test, or if they say that you're not beige, you're not light skin, okay, they actually are Eurocentric because they're basing light skin tones on what's beige. Because according to ChatGPT, it says that the number one most common feature in a European descent person is having a light beige skin tone. It says it ranges from very pale to a medium olive. So if you have light beige, pale, or medium olive skin, then there's no denying that you're going to be stereotyped as somebody with European descent, even if you are monoracial. But let's get back to the featurism though. A lot of people in the white community are perceived as having more diverse eye colors, so blue, green, hazel, gray, amber, light brown. And then if you think about blue and green eyes, that's more common in Northern and Eastern European people. So for the nose, an actual Eurocentric nose would be kind of a higher nasal bridge. So the narrow, straight nose with that defined tip. The tip of the nose is what a lot of people are looking at. So the common thing for European noses is having that defined tip, kind of a sharper, I guess you could call it a sharper nose tip. That's what I would call it. And then having more projected nasal profiles. So your nose pops out of your face more than average. You know, obviously, if a person is of Asian descent or of African descent, their nose may pop out of their face just a little bit, but it's not like they turn to the side and their nose is like very prominent from a side profile. And then for lips, it said on ChatGPT, the average European person would have medium to thin lips. So that's why I said that if you have thin lips, technically that's actually being associated with European descent. So most likely there's some form of European descent in your bloodline, which is causing you to have these thin lips as opposed to having these very full African lips. But it actually does say on ChatGPT that full lips are seen in some populations like Southern Europeans or Slavic women. Also, having a longer face is more common in the European community. So if you've got a long face shape, especially if you have kind of like this pointed or square chin, that's especially the pointy chin. I see a lot of European people with kind of that more pointy chin. So I'm thinking of Lady Gaga. She's like one of the people I think of when I think of a pointed chin. So having a more angular lower face, so kind of this sharper, a sharper chin. But what do you ladies think? Do you have any of these features? Have any of your facial features been stereotyped or othered? Because that's all I want to talk about on this channel is what facial features have been othered by the unambiguous Black community, and I want to see if any of us have any common experiences. So let's get the discussion started in the comment section below. Let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.